Hi, I'm Michael Killen. Recently, I was working on a project with Stanford University. The mission of the project was to interpret some television programs as well as a large painting that articulated, explained Stanford's new energy system that it was building or had built. And as I worked on that project, I discovered that Stanford had reached out to a major energy company to get advice and to support their plan. And I discovered the company they reached out to was called Electricité de France, EDF. And I became interested in that company. And I decided to invite a vice president from that company to come on this program and to learn more about EDF. And here he is. And my guest is Jan van der Lee. And you are a vice president of EDF Innovation Lab. And where is it? Located right in Silicon Valley. By the way, Jan, how many years have you been here?
Also almost 5 years. 5 years I've been here in the Silicon Valley and in charge of EDF Innovation Lab.
And I have learned you've also lived in Paris, France, Africa, and then I know you come from Amsterdam.
Yes, that's correct. First of all, Michael, I would like to thank you for having me on this show. It's really an opportunity for us. Yes, I have been, I'm pretty international. I have lived in 4 different countries, 3 different continents. I'm from Holland. I went to France. I've been in Africa, and now I live here in the United States.
How many years were you in France, and how many years did you work for EDF?
I worked for EDF for 10 years. I have been in France for 25 years. So I joined EDF 10 years ago. Before that, I was a professor and a researcher at one of the universities or schools in France, which is named as École des Mines de Paris, School of Mines of Paris.
Oh, besides all your education, which is, I think you have an undergraduate degree, and then you have a master's degree, and then you have a PhD, and you've also been a professor.
Yes, I guess that's true. So I really was interested in science. I worked for almost 20 years as at that school as a researcher, and then as a professor. And at some point in time, I decided it was for me time to also to look at the applications parts, and that's why I joined EDF 10 years ago.
All right, in a few minutes, I want to ask you some questions about the company you work for, Electricité de France. But I do want to say you came over to my studio, and you know I have a couple of professions, talk show host, and then I make paintings. You are the only person to walk into my studio and take a look at my big painting that I was making for Stanford and to say, Michael, that's not correct, that's not correct. You had the audacity to take over. And you know how I felt about that?
You tell me.
Come back. I like nothing better than people who have knowledge to come and take a look at my work, give me feedback, and you gave me wonderful feedback as I was going in the wrong direction on something. So you were audacious, but God, it's the kind of thing that helps me do a good job.
Well, I thought it was very interesting to see and to discover someone here in the middle of the Silicon Valley who looks at energy, who looks at huge challenges like climate change through a lens which is not technology, which is not data science. We are engineers. I work mainly with engineers. We have this technology focus, and you are opening, let's say, this kind of challenges to people, to an audience we do not reach. So I thought that was really amazing, very interesting. I went to your studio, and I didn't want to take over anything. That's my engineering background, who took over for a moment and say, you have to connect this element to that element, otherwise thermodynamics do not work.
Yeah.
Sorry for that, but that was a very needed reaction, just came out of my heart.
Would you come over next week again? I was wondering, first of all, I had started to become interested in France. First of all, you may or may not remember, I have been painting California's 6 climate goals. And so I've been focused intensely on these goals. And I have learned something as a young boy, that if you focus on something and study it, yes, you can learn a lot, you can work with it, but if you really want to learn and do a good job, you want to look at that from a higher perspective, like a group of countries that are working on the same goal, and then you can see some things. So I used to think California was the world leader, let's say, in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And then as I looked at the French, I noticed France per capita has, relatively speaking, low emissions, considerably lower than that of the great, highly advanced leader, California. You of course, know what the emissions are for France.
Yeah, well, I think the emissions per capita in France are something like 5 metric tons per capita. I think it's at least 3 times more in the United States. So we have a low emission per capita in France. And the reason for that is that we have a very decarbonized electric grid. And so electricity generation is in France almost entirely decarbonized today. And also it doesn't emit any particles, so it's also very clean in terms of air pollution.
And healthy.
Exactly. Exactly. We also should focus on that, because one of these, we're speaking about climate change, but air pollution is a major issue in many parts of the country, and it impacts health of a tremendous number of people who cannot afford to escape the cities. So we dealt with that in France in first place with a very clean electricity mix. And I think the specificity of France is having a very large nuclear park or fleet for nuclear, and a lot of hydro. I can give you perhaps an example. Yesterday, how it looked like yesterday, typical day in France. We had I think a 92 gigawatts of capacity needed to respect the demand, the load. 52 was from nuclear. That's 55% came from nuclear generation. 10 gigawatts came from hydro. That's 11%. So 66% was already emission-free. Then it was a very windy day. It was also a very sunny day. So we had, I think, about 14 or 15 gigawatts coming from just wind and solar. So that's a typical day in France. It almost entirely decarbonized. Another interesting part was that we overproduced energy and we exported that energy to our neighbors. They have a less green energy grid, so we're providing clean energy to our neighbors, to the UK, to Italy, to Spain, to Germany, to Switzerland, etc. So that's a typical day in France. A clean grid, which allows us now to go to the next step, which is, and we're going to talk about it, I hope, a little bit, electrification of all the other parts of the economy.
I think it's interesting that the name of your company is Electricity.
Yeah.
And we have certainly entered a phase in our civilization of electrifying everything possible, because I think it will lead to being able to use clean energy to provide the power, the electricity we need. Am I correct?
Absolutely, yeah. So EDF is our value is decarbonizing. It's really part of our values, core values, decarbonizing the economy. And we are a worldwide company. We are operating in 30 different countries. We have 140 gigawatts of generation capacity worldwide. And most of it is carbon emission free. So if we want to further help in decarbonizing the economy, we have to do much more. And that part is the first thing in many countries, in France, but also in California, is the transportation sector. So if you start to electrify the transportation sector, and you think about electric cars, but you can also, you have also to look at boats, at trains, you start really to contribute to a cleaner environment and to reducing the carbon emissions. So EDF also plays and starts to play an increasing role in electrification. You mentioned Stanford. They electrified. Essentially, they get rid of all their gas-fired assets and they electrified their campus, reducing by 70% their carbon emissions. That's significant. In California, 45% of the emissions are due to transportation. In France, it's roughly the same thing, even close to 50%. So by attacking that part of the economy, that part of that segment, we can further decarbonize the economy. And EDF is really trying to push this forward by providing infrastructure, by providing more smart charging stations. EDF wants to become the smart charging leader of Europe within the next years. And we rolled out a huge program in order to support it.
Let's see, I won't buy a Tesla because I don't want to worry about running out of energy on the road 200 miles or whatever. But maybe down the road I might, especially if the charging stations proliferate all over the place. So that's one of the things your company wants to do, become the world leader, or certainly European leader, maybe even the United States leader of charging stations.
Smart charging, allowing cars to charge, or allowing drivers to charge their car at moments of the day where we have cheap and clean energy, typically in the middle of the day in California.
Really?
So that's our goal. We are trying to roll it. We want to be to allow people to switch to electric cars without being worried about I cannot drive from point A to point B because I cannot charge my car somewhere. So rolling out, we are an infrastructure company. We know about infrastructure. We know about upscaling. So it's typically something, and it's linked to the grid. So it's typically something EDF can handle and should play and will play a role.
So you're in Silicon Valley, Los Altos. So you're telling me, I think, you've been studying the United States market for smart charging systems infrastructure, right?
It's correct. Well, it's part of our work. That's not a key. We are working on many different ways and looking at California as being one step ahead in many aspects with regard to other countries, including France and all other countries where we are having relationships with. Renewable energy it's a significant part of the energy mix already in California. And the challenges which come with renewable energy, for example, the flexibility problem. You want to, you need to ramp up your energy when the sun goes down at the end of the day. It's something we will be facing later, but you're already facing here, so we can learn a lot from California. But we also look at smart charging. We have a little pilot study running here, and perhaps one of our business lines will roll out, and it's already doing so, by the way, roll out a smart charging solution for customers, which are generally commercial, industrial customers or buildings, proposing people coming to work to charge their car at very, very low costs.
So you're going to have a pilot.
Yeah, we have it.
What part of California?
Well, we are running a pilot in Los Altos. In San Diego, we have a business in San Diego, EDF Renewable Energy, and we have a pilot running there. And now we are expanding the pilot in the Silicon Valley to start with.
Okay, and so this pilot or that aspect of the infrastructure is connecting into organizations like PG&E and other utilities. That's it?
Of course, everything is extremely linked to pricing, to incentives. It's very difficult to push electrification without policy, without incentives. It's something we don't have a handle on, but we have to understand what these policies are, how we can bring the value of these incentives down to the drivers, to the users, to the customers. And we have to understand how that market will evolve in time. If indeed, as California wants to push forward to a clean energy grid, to clean energy in 2045, a lot of things will change. Markets will change, pricing will change, and we have to understand, because these are investments. You don't make these investments for 5 years or 10 years. These are made for 15, 20 years. So we have to understand these markets and the evolution of these markets. And that's part of the work we're doing here.
Okay, so you mentioned utilities, or you mentioned clean energy, which means we have to get it through utilities. In terms of services, what other services are you offering the utilities, or what is the greatest challenge the utilities in the United States face in the next 5 to 10 years? However you want to handle that.
Yeah, that's a very difficult question to answer. It's looking into the future is always hard. But what we see is, as everywhere, is a decentralization of everything. As you've seen, what happens with Uber. Go ahead.
Or with the computer industry.
Computer industry.
In the 60s, it was all centralized, and then it started to get distributed. It's so distributed, even children have.
Exactly. And in energy, what we see here in California, but it's even pushed much further in other parts of the US, including Hawaii, etc. It's really, customers are becoming not only consumers, but also producers of energy. And sometimes they install batteries, they become part of the electricity system. And this is an opportunity for us, because we can, if you aggregate all these different resources, you could predict and provide flexibility if we can have a handle on how they will manage their energy. So all these, what we call the local energy systems, and there are smaller one, which could be a house with solar panels and a battery in the basement, or bigger systems like Stanford's system, which is 180 buildings all brought together and sharing together heating and cooling, electricity. That impacts the way the utility will provide energy or even has to buy the energy. So it is currently already impacting in a very, very significant way all the utilities in many, many parts of the United States, in France, and specifically there where in the parts where there's a lot of renewable energy. We have rooftop solar and community solar, or sites, microgrids, which are being created in different places. Sites where people start to manage their own energy.
So I think you've mentioned two, maybe more than that, aspects of infrastructure that EDF can help with, and one that is building the infrastructure for charging, United States, all of Europe, etc. And then you seem to mention another one to help the utilities adjust to this new world of distributed energy. And so, am I correct?
Yeah, that's correct. We're helping ourselves. We are a utility. We are a vertical, fully integrated utility. And so we're working together with the utilities in order to obtain solutions for this specific problem. The energy system as a whole is getting more complex. It's getting more distributed, it's getting more data-driven, and it's getting more customer-driven. People want to play, they want to be part of the system, which is great, because currently they are aware of energy savings they can do in their space, in their home. So that's a wonderful evolution. At the same time, it becomes more complex. We have to get access to the data in order to be able to predict what the loads for the next day will be. With the introduction of electric vehicles, and this is really booming here in California. Again, we are one step ahead here in California, as with many other aspects. So then that becomes even more complex, because now the people want to have their car charged when they leave in the morning. They want to have their car charged when they go on holidays, when they have to drive for a long way. So, and you go one step further if you start to electrify buses, which would be a huge breakthrough. Just think about the school buses here. School buses are just used only for a couple of hours per day, and they need to be charged, and then we need to charge at the end of the day again. So these are challenges we are facing, and we have to solve that with the customer. We cannot just solve that by ourselves. We have to understand, they have to understand the challenges we face, and we have to understand the needs of these specific customers. And that's, I think, something every utility is seeing coming today.
Okay, so you're a utility, and when I think about the utilities in the United States that are providing energy using some hydro and a few other things, but coal, and they still use oil, and I wouldn't be too surprised if the state I live in, California, is importing some energy that is coming from burning coal in Nevada. But I don't think you hit hard on the point that our utilities need to provide energy from clean sources.
Yeah, it's absolutely key. So I would say you have to clean a grid, then electrify everything. You have to clean the grid, but the trend is there. The grid is getting cleaner. Every state in the United States, almost every state, and many countries, they're moving towards a cleaner grid as much as they can. But they should be focused on that. They should be focused. It's very, we see a couple of trends and sometimes policies which goes against it. But overall, if we look at the grid here in California, in Texas and elsewhere, the grid is getting cleaner. And it takes time, but it's getting there, the trend is there. Electrification also needs time. So once the grid is clean, and then we start electrifying, we will be behind. So we have to start electrifying today, knowing that the grid will become cleaner and cleaner and cleaner. Yet it should be, all utilities should continue and will continue to find solutions to get to a cleaner grid. Get rid of coal, reduce gas as much as possible, use renewables wherever possible, and nuclear wherever possible. This will give us a clean grid by the end of the day.
I'd like to ask this question about France. I notice there are people, probably the Greenpeace type people, and they're very greenish, and they want France to reduce its dependency on clean energy, which is nuclear energy. And they want half of the source to be renewable energy. I find it a little weird. Most renewables really are not clean, or they're more clean, but they're backed up by gas and other fossil fuels. What do you think about the people in France that want to reduce the amount of clean energy, low cost, relatively low cost energy from nuclear in France?
Well, it's a choice people make, and it's a choice the government makes. What their goal is to reduce. So we currently we're having 75% of our electricity is produced by nuclear. So the goal is to reduce. First of all, the overall goal is to go to a totally carbon neutral society by 2015, which is a great goal. 2050. It's far away, but if you look at the steps which has to be taken immediately today, there are already a couple of really short-term steps which needs to be taken in order to get there. So they want to reduce now from 75% to 50% the share of nuclear. And that this should be replaced by clean energy, renewable energy. including hydro. So I would say the importance is that we keep a clean grid. If we can use renewable energy to do so, and people want to do so, then that's the way to move forward. At the end of the day, there will be always a significant part of nuclear, which 50% is still very significant. The real question is how fast and how far can we go in replacing current nuclear plants, which is 24/7 energy, very, very condensed, very cheap, how we can replace that by renewable energy without increasing the costs for the society. These are challenges they're looking at today.
All right, we don't have much time left, but I'd like to ask, you've been in the United States 5 years.
Correct.
I hope it's been a good experience.
It's a wonderful experience.
You and your wife have made some friends, and your son?
Yeah, this is absolutely a great place to live here. My sons are extremely happy, and they have become Californian.
But gigantic corporations often want their leaders to head back at some point or move on. You're going to go back. You think you're going to get transferred back out of here soon?
It's a possibility.
What new job would you think you can do the best for EDF?
That's an interesting question. So I think that one of those areas I could be most useful, and also because I believe that's really a path forward, is to go to the nuclear sector and to contribute in developing new nuclear plants, because we have to start replace old plants with new plants, which must be cheaper than the one we are currently building, and of course the same safety standards, and if possible exportable to other places in the world where we need clean energy. So I think that's at some point that's an area where I would like to contribute to.
Okay, well that's certainly quite interesting, and I think we're just about out of time, and am I going to get a signal like that I should end this? Yes, thank you. My guest is Jan van der Lee. He is the Vice President of Innovation, Electricity du France. I am Michael Killen, and in June at Stanford will be displaying a painting I made in conjunction to EDF's work, as well as a large painting on safeguard civilization. I'm Michael Killen. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mike.